J-Lo is great, and even like Katy Perry is pretty great. But Beyonce is definitely more athletic than anybody, and uses that athleticism to create performance art that is communicating a message about our times.
This is the Living Numbers Podcast, and I am your host, Tony Rambles. This is the place where everyone's interesting if you ask the right questions. Of course, we have to start off with our 4 appeals, 20 seconds, ready, set, go. Number 1, share, rate, and review, 5 stars, whatever platform you listen to this on. Number 2, subscribe on Apple and Spotify for the behind the scenes content. Me and Linda just had a lot of great stuff, and the episode hasn't even started. Number 3, follow on IG and TikTok at the Living Numbers Podcast. And number 4, merch link in the hoodie. Merch link in the description, hoodies and t-shirts. And I know I didn't make it in 20 seconds that time, but that's okay. Okay, of course, when we have somebody on for the first time, we have to give them an elaborate introduction. So, hailing from Boston, Massachusetts, our guest has earned many degrees. Let's run them down. A bachelor's in business management from Bentley University, a bachelor's in music from New England Conservatory, and coming soon, a master's in clinical neuroscience from King's College in London. She's an associate professor of voice at Berklee College of Music and does vocal coaching through her company as well as through Balliro Vocal Studio. That's her place. That's where she gets the job done. After performing as a classical singer in Europe for over a decade and mentoring with the leading master voice teachers out there, she decided to develop her own approach to training your voice through her book, Being a Singer. I present the Linda Balliro. I hope I said that right.
You absolutely did, Tony. Thank you very much.
Yes.
It's great to be here.
I typically don't ask because I want to just try to get the name right. And I got it this time.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
A lot of people don't. So bravo.
We're going to kick it off with our first number here. And I don't know if Linda is a hockey fan or not, but the Boston Bruins have won 63 games and scored 133 points. Now, whether you're a hockey fan or not, that's okay. Just know that this team is killing it. These are both records in their respective sport. But I bring up the Boston Bruins because, like I said before, Linda is from Boston, Massachusetts. Now, we all know that, our country wasn't necessarily birthed in Boston, but a lot of very important things happened there. There's such a rich history. So, because Linda has been so many places, one of the first things that I thought of is, how does Boston compare to other places? So I'll kick it off there. How has Boston shaped you? And then when you go other places, are you like, that's different?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, Tony, because Boston is so rich in history, and especially, obviously, American history, which in terms of the world is actually very short, right? We know. And so Boston history is short compared to the rest of the world. But for Americans, it is the longest part of our history, right? The deepest part of our history. And so growing up, I was around that all the time and developed a great love and curiosity and interest in the history of the United States. And I think that definitely set me off on this path of appreciating older things and being interested in what was behind things that we have today, what led us to where we are today. And I always was fascinated by that. So constantly being around the history helps a lot.
I honestly thought, like, when I saw that you were from Boston, that there would be like this heavy Boston accent, but there
You
wasn't
know,
any.
there was, but I studied theater and singing for many, many years, so I did not grow up talking like this. And you can be sure that when I was a teenager, I packed the car and Harvard Yard.
I think that New England area, based on like other things that I've listened to, like there's a very distinct culture there. Can you describe that culture for the listener who has never been to the Northeast?
Yeah, that's also a great question because I think it's a little bit complicated here. I think it's complicated because there's a little bit of this Boston Brahmin culture, which is left over from the early days of the United States when there was a lot of wealthy people from England living in Boston, and they sort of talk like this and they sort of act like this. And that is no longer here, but somehow it's seeped into some of the way you you will find in parts of the city. And on the other side, we have that Boston was a huge part of the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. And the Emancipation Proclamation was read downtown Boston at the Park Street Church. And so we have a strong, big history that's associated with all those dark things that we have in the past of the United States. And we were a big stop on the Underground Railroad. And actually, my mother's house, where I'm living right now, was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And yeah, and so we have this history too. And then we have a whole set of almost rural towns in areas in Massachusetts that are influenced by the Boston culture, but very, very different. It's almost like you
Mm.
can drive 2 or 3 hours and you have a completely different culture because it's more slow, it's more rural. They have, different kind of communities, and and so it's really this tiny state has this really complex um, culture.
What part of Boston do you feel like you carry with you everywhere you go because you've traveled the world? Because I know for me, that's this is kind of how I think of the question. Because I don't live in the city where I'm from, whenever like we're talking about anything, I'm always very quick to mention like, oh no, 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 no. I'm not from here. I'm from Detroit, you know. I'm not
Yeah.
from, Texas, or I'm not from wherever. I'm from Michigan. So that kind of pride I think only comes when you leave your city. And I don't know, it just has this reputation because we know about Detroit and the history and it being one of the major cities in America and obviously falling way, way off to where it is now. But do you ever feel like that? Did you feel like that as you traveled the world and been around to these different places?
Yes, I agree with you that when you leave home, you have that sort of nostalgic connection
Mm,
with your past, with your history, and so as human beings, we seek that connection with our history all the time. It gives us a feeling of placement in who we are and identity. And when you leave that place where you grew up, that's something that you carry with you everywhere you go. And I think growing up in Boston, in the Boston area, Massachusetts, I was most influenced by the ocean. So Cape Cod in the summers, and Boston is right on the water, and there's a lot of fun things for kids and people to do on the waterfront. And then there's the North Shore, which is Gloucester and Rockport. And then if you continue up, it's Maine and these beautiful coastlines. And I definitely carry that experience with the ocean with me everywhere throughout my life, and later became a scuba diver probably because of it.
wow. Okay. Scuba dive. See, I didn't catch that in the research. All right.
Just throw that into your mix.
Like, oh, I just did a scuba diving thing, here and there. No big deal. So you grew up, I'm guessing, singing around the house. Like, what were some of your like favorite bands or songs to sing, in those early years?
I did sing a lot, so I sang, first thing in the morning when I woke up, and I didn't know this
Mm,
until my mother told me, and when I was a teenager, one morning, I was running around the house trying to get ready for school because I was always late. And my mother called me in her room and she said, "Come here." And I said, "I'm going to be late. I'm in a hurry. Why is she bothering me?" Kind of thing, bratty teenager, right? And she said, "Do you know that I was really tired when you were born because I was the fifth child?" And she said, "I was older and I didn't know if I was going to be too exhausted to take care of an infant. And the nurses at the hospital told me that you were singing, and this is very rare for a newborn to sing. I mean, I
mm,
wouldn't call it singing. I was making vocalizations of some kind, right?" And I said, "Why are you telling me this story right now?" She said, "Because when I brought you home from the hospital, and I just thought, I don't know if I can do this again. I'm so exhausted. And the first morning I woke up to this sound, and you were singing in your crib. And it was, the first morning home. So I was a brand new person. And I said, "Why are you telling me this now? I'm late." And she said, "Because you still do that. The first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is sing." And I'd been doing it my whole life and I didn't know until she told me.
mm.
And so I always had
Wow.
that need to vocalize. And,
Mm,
I grew up listening to my parents' records first, which is, I think what most people do, and my parents were followers of the Rat Pack. So now I'm dating myself, but my parents liked to follow Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, and we had a lot of those records, but we also had records, mind you, that dates me even more precisely because they were not CDs, right? So, we had, these records and Judy Garland, and that's kind of what I grew up with and what I loved. So I love Judy Garland, and of course, I still think it's one of the most fantastic voices we've had.
mm.
But I didn't get into sort of contemporary pop music until probably my early teens, and then I was actually a big rock music fan. So I was really loved Led Zeppelin, and I really loved Jethro Tull. But at the same time, I could listen all day to Carly Simon and people like that. So I was kind of eclectic, and I also grew up on
Mm.
Soul Train. So I was at that generation where Soul Train was on the TV on Saturday mornings. So I was up and watching my Soul Train and fell in love with Stevie Wonder. And when I started
Wow.
playing piano, I would play Stevie Wonder songs and cry, and just was completely in love with that music. And so then I became an opera singer. Who knows why? But that's the background.
So I like to ask this question because personally, I always flip flop between 70s, like hard rock, and then like that electronic sound of the 80s. And my guess is you're very familiar with this group, Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's one of my favorite groups because you can hear their sound change as the times change. So I give you that background to ask, do you have a favorite era of music?
Hmm. For contemporary American music, that's so tough because there's so many great
Mm,
things. But I would have to say it's gonna be the late '60s and early '70s.
mm,
There was just so much going on because there was, yeah, on one hand, there was the rise of the singer-songwriter. So Bob, uh the people who went to New York and they were setting up their apartments in Greenwich Village and playing on their guitar, and that was the birth of the singer-songwriter generation. And at the same time, you had Motown and you had, Detroit.
yeah.
I mean, that is the greatest music that we've had came out of there, and that is the basis for all the music we have today. So all those
Mm,
girl groups and guy groups that were just unbelievable musicians and unbelievable, hard workers and creative people just creating all the
mm.
time, uh, they're the foundation for everything we're doing today.
What do you feel like? I guess as you you can do it maybe by decades. I guess that's how I'm thinking of it, or genres, if you like. As you listen to music, because clearly you're like a music head, like you love music, you care about music. I never was trained in music or studied music, but I listened to a lot of music from a lot of different eras. So, who would you say kind of broke the mold, like through these different genres and different times? Like you mentioned, you know, I mean, um, you mentioned dang Motown. Yeah,
Mhm,
and so you have groups like the Temptations who did a lot of great things. You already mentioned Judy Garland. So like, who are some of these other people that when you heard them, you was like, oh, that is very different from what I've been hearing. That's
mhm.
special.
Yeah, well, most of the time, in order we can only judge that by looking back. It's very
Hmm.
rare that we know it at the moment that it happens. Sometimes you do, but most of the time it's in looking back. So if we look back to the '70s and late '60s, it's gonna be Stevie Wonder because Stevie Wonder
Yep.
changed everything. And then if we look into the '80s, we're gonna see, like, Whitney Houston, changed the vocal scene and was the rise of the voice. So in the '80s, the big power vocalist became the leading thing for contemporary music, and Whitney Houston
Mm,
was the one who drove that, maybe. We also, though, have to talk about Aretha Franklin, '70s, '60s,
mm,
'70s, and '80s, because she changed everything. And she changed everything not only because of her tremendous voice and singing ability, but because she was a consummate musician. She could play piano like nobody, and hardly anyone knows that today. But if you go on YouTube, you'll find the some recordings of her playing the piano, and she was unbelievable. She also
mm,
wrote music. She could lead a band. She could arrange. She could do everything. And in that generation, that was unusual to find a woman who was doing that and was able to have a career. That's why she was so successful. But those people really changed a lot of things. And then if we go further on, we have sort of the rise in the '90s of the boy bands, and
mm.
they changed music again. That was a big trend, right? The New Kids on the Block and those kinds of
In
groups
sync.
that, yeah, in sync, and that led to a whole 'nother trend and way of listening to music. And so trends come and go all the time, but to find the people who really made an impact and changed things for
Hmm.
future generations, we have to kind of look back. So we can see today, for example, Billie Eilish had a huge impact and created a whole new trend. But whether or not that's going to have lasting power, we have to wait a little while to see. And then we'll be able to look
Mm,
back and say, oh, yeah, that was a changing point in time when that music came and everybody started going in that direction and that changed things. We won't know until we look back.
right. When you said that, we won't know until we look back. The person that I first thought of, even though I'm asking you this question, now I'm thinking of the question like, who would I say? And this, I think he may be like an exception, like something like a Michael Jackson, where you go, whoa,
Mm,
Eminem. You know, I don't know if you're a
mm,
huge rap
yes,
music person, but I'm guessing
yes,
you are.
yes,
When he came out, it was like, who is
yes.
this guy? And like the stuff that he was talking about, I mean, was ter- there's no kid ever that should be listening to that kind of music with that kind of content. But I've always been impressed with the delivery of how he was able to. He was like a craftsman when it came to the rap technique,
Mhm,
and that's always been like something that I had always been a fan of. And so when he came out and he did Slim Shady, well, he had Infinite before. Nobody ever really talks about that, but he had the Slim Shady, then he had Marshall Mathers, and then the Eminem Show, and you have these like back to back albums that are all amazing and something that nobody was doing. And he was a white guy, and he was backed by Dr. Dre. Like, I think that's one of the exceptions, I would say. And I would agree that it's not until hindsight where for most people you can tell. But I think like him and like a Michael Jackson, those are people, and probably Stevie Wonder. uh, where you go, whoa, like right away, like this is different. Um, I think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I have to agree with you. I forgot Michael, I don't know why I forgot him because he was monumental, and he was monumental
Mm,
also because of everything that he could do. He was also a consummate person who could do so much of the dancing and the acting and the singing and the music and the arranging. He was an incredible musician, and we don't always get to know that because most of his music is pop. But that was because that was commercially wanted, but he was actually an
mm,
extraordinary musician, could blow everybody away with his R&B. He just didn't make his career in that, in the dancing, of course, but he was also the showman. So he was the first person since Elvis. There was Elvis who started that showmanship, and he was probably the first one since Elvis to make a show, and nobody did it like him, and everybody's been trying to copy him ever since. And I agree with you about Eminem. I had forgotten that, but certainly, yeah. I mean, he brought rap to a center where most white people had not heard it before, and were, whoa, what is this? And again, the content that made you actually think and pay attention, and which harkens back to the um, the '60s, right? When
mm.
people were singing about Marvin Gaye, you have like What's Going On, and um,
Oh yeah,
these kinds of songs that were all about what was happening in the world at the
Sam
time, which,
Cooke.
yeah, which is just coincidentally totally relevant to today. Those lyrics could be written today, right? And that's what makes it such a great song. And I think Eminem is like that. In hip hop in general is another trend that's really interesting because it came obviously from the streets, right? It became an art form because it was first a form that people were just using as self expression, which is exactly what happened with the blues, right? The blues
Mm,
was a form of music that people just created at home, expressing themselves with their family and friends about their lives. And some, white guys in Detroit, I think, um, in the music industry said, "Oh, wow, we can sell that." And then the music industry was born, and the blues became a business.
mm.
But in hip hop is like that. It was a form of just human expression, just a totally naturally evolved thing that some people recognized was a good business opportunity, and that's why we have hip hop. So that certainly changed everything.
I want to ask you about somebody specific because when you talked about performing, like the stage as a performance, not just singing, but there's a show. I thought about Beyonce.
Yes.
Would you say that she changed the game, or she just took what the game was and did it better than a lot of people? Because I think that there is a difference.
Well, it's interesting you should mention her because I was interviewed by Slate.com. I don't know if you know that's online newspaper magazine,
Mm,
Slate, Slate. And I was interviewed by a journalist there on exactly this topic about Beyonce. It was her 40th birthday or something. She
She's
is
40.
she's
Wow.
older than that now because this was a few years ago. So yeah, it's incredible, Beyoncé being so grown up, mother and everything, and she's still going strong. I mean, she hasn't
Yep.
had a downturn at all at any time during her career.
Mm,
She's like Michael Jackson, and what she has done is build on Michael Jackson, basically, right? Because he was the one that came out with "Man in the Mirror," and he spearheaded that with Stevie Wonder. He spearheaded that song about to raise money for AIDS and We Are the World. So
mm,
Michael Jackson was doing that, uh, current events and important issues, but she took it to a whole new level, right? She takes it to a whole new level. And she was also like Michael, she was also raised from a very early age to work hard physically and
mm,
rehearse over and over again. And in Michael Jackson's case, it was, I think, generally accepted that it was pretty abusive what he went through. And
mhm,
in Beyonce's case, we don't have that view or perspective. Her father pushed her a lot, but nobody seems to think it was abusive. and just
Mm.
pushed her a lot, and she had to do a lot of physically demanding things. But of course, now she's the biggest athlete we have in the performance world, and there's nobody on the scene who, since the time she came on, who can do any of the things that she can do. I mean, she can dance and sing like nobody, and
Mm.
some others do it very well too. J Lo is great, and even like Katy Perry is pretty great. But Beyonce is definitely more athletic than anybody, and uses that athleticism to create performance art that is communicating a
Mm.
message about our times.
We could probably just talk about music all day. Like, again, I'm like, well, let me ask about Prince, and then I want to ask about
Oh
somebody.
yeah,
I'm just
Prince.
okay. Like, we could just literally, because then you got like, we didn't even touch on like 90s alternative rock, which is another, you got like a Linkin Park who burned really, really hot at a very different time. But okay, I want to
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
talk
it's an
more
endless
about
topic. It's an endless topic, right? This is a topic that, you could have nonstop.
its own podcast. I'm sure I could have, man. All right. So this is going to kick us to our next number. It's still about music, but it's more about your journey in music. And this number is 19th century, which is when the term classical music arose, according to my very small amount of research from Wikipedia. So when did you like get into classical singing? Because that's very, very different from most of the music that we've been talking about.
Yes, it's a really good question, and that term classical is the use of it today is a little weird. So your
Mm.
Wikipedia information isn't wrong. The world of art music is labeled by epics, by just like we were talking 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. The classical world is by like Renaissance, Baroque,
Mm.
in all these different epics. And the classical epic was this time in the 19th century. But today, we in America use that word to say art music that is not in the contemporary vein. So a lot of people in the world of singing this kind of music like to prefer to call it art music, because
Mm.
the difference is that the lyrics are not are like text and poetry and prose and that kind of lyric as opposed to conversational. And the range of the music is different, and the rhythm is different. So those are the main differences. And I have a very strange journey because I was listening to all this music that we were just talking about. I told you I was in love with Stevie Wonder when I was 10 and sat at the piano and cried, playing "Living Just for the City" and things like that. And then I turned on Channel 2, WGBH in Boston, and I saw a production at the Metropolitan Opera, and I was
Mm.
like this for an hour. I was just completely enthralled and flabbergasted. And I said, "Well, this combines everything that I love about music
Mm.
and performance, and this is what I want to do." And that's just crazy because this kind of singing and music is usually an acquired taste, but I just immediately loved it, which is, unusual. So, my mother decided if I was going to sing any in public, I better get voice lessons. And so she sent me to New England Conservatory for Children for the extension division for kids, and I started studying there, where I later went and got my degree, and that's how I got involved in it.
Wow. Do you remember singing like your first classical song or art music song? How do I refer to this now? I've
Yeah,
been
you
educated.
can say classical, a lot of people do, but you can also say art music, art song. I don't remember exactly the first one, but I think it might have just been one of the typical Italian songs and
Hmm.
arias. There is a whole body of work that was the pop music of the 17th and 18th century that is the foundation for classical musicians, singers and musicians to study, because that was the time period when There was great technical skill in playing instruments and singing, enormous technical skill, and it was everywhere. And musicians could do everything. They were composers and pianists and
Mm,
singers and they played string instruments. They could just, if you were a musician, you just did music. You just did everything. It wasn't so boxed as it is today. So the skill
mm.
level was very, very high. And so generally we use those songs. So I'm sure I sang one of those early Italian arias or songs from that sort of pop music of the day.
What was the hardest part to transition? Because you talked about how much you love Stevie Wonder, and then you go into art music. So, what was the hardest part to go? Okay, wait, that's not how you do it here. This is different.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think probably vocally, my biggest problem was the influence from Judy Garland because, she's female, and I watched her movies as a kid growing up, and also, like I said, the Rat Pack, and so I was kind of influenced by that sort of belting, power singing, and even though I didn't know what it was, I didn't even know the word belting. I don't know if anybody used that word then, but I didn't use it and I didn't know what it was, but I was influenced by that sort of musical theater, put it all out on there, and
Yeah.
and this was C'est ben crudele, this is poetry. And I was used to just putting it all out there.
And like, hold
So
on, bring it down a little bit.
yeah, so I had to balance, and then learning vocal technique
Mm,
itself is a very high level skill and takes many years to master it. And then my first voice teacher wasn't very good, so which is very common. It happens to many singers because you don't know what you're doing, so you don't know how to judge if somebody's the right person for you. And I had a big voice, so he was giving me like a lot of opera arias when I was 16, 17 years old. That's not a good idea because they put a lot of demands on the voice and the voice isn't finished growing.
mm.
So you shouldn't be singing arias until you've got some level of physical maturity and technical maturity. Otherwise, it might sound great in the moment, but it's not going to be good for you because it's like a doing too much heavy lifting before you've built up the muscles for it. So I
That's a
had to
great
go through
analogy.
that and then get my technique straightened out, which is a very common story among a lot of singers, not my students.
How so? When did you decide, okay, I want to do singing as a job? Like, okay, I'm getting out of the training part is happening, and obviously you like it, you love it, you gotta love it to do it for as long as you did and to progress to where you are now. But when did you go like, all right, I'm getting old enough to where it's like maybe time to maybe start touring and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I knew pretty early on when I was 12 or
Mm,
13 that I was gonna do this for the rest of my life, and, there's always the question of how you're gonna live and how you're gonna make money, but I never really worried about it too much because
mm,
I didn't really want a lot of money. So I grew up around people who had a lot of money, and I didn't think they were very happy, and it never looked attractive to me. So that sounds crazy today because in today's world we see so much celebrity and money, and we all want to get to the next level and get this stuff and get this next car, and just I wasn't in that generation. We didn't have social
mm.
media, so I just saw people around me who had a lot of money and weren't particularly happy, and so it didn't seem to me like going after money was a good thing to do. And so I decided that I wanted to do this, and I just had to be creative to find a way to make it work. And the way that I made it work is when I graduated from New England Conservatory in Boston, I found a school in Hungary, which is the Kodai Institute in Hungary, which is east of Austria in Europe, and it was very inexpensive. And so I could sell my car and I could afford to go to Europe for a year. And
Mm.
that's what I did.
That's a big difference. Boston, like, if you don't mind me asking, what year was this for
That's a really good
context?
question. I think it must have been like 94.
Man, so going from
That before you were born?
no, no, I
Good,
was 5.
good.
But just going from like the United States, Boston area, this is what you know, to a country like Hungary that I would feel like a lot of people hadn't really even heard of, because I'm just thinking, here we go, going back to my experience. We went from Houston, Texas, and I taught English in China. And I didn't know the language. It was my wife and and I graduated college. And so I'm like, what's next? And then we just go. So how was that transition for you? Talk about the experience where you go, oh crap, like I'm in a different country. Like this is not, you're no longer in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. What
Kansas
was that
anymore.
experience like for you?
Tony, you are amazing. We kind of did the same thing, you know? I mean, if I wasn't in music, I would have probably packed up and gone to China to teach English too. So really the same thing. So the place that I went to, though, was the year after communism fell. If you remember
Oh
the
my
history
goodness.
from that time, is when communism
What?
fell in 93 or 92, 93, 94, right? So the wall in Germany was
Mm-hmm.
falling, and Hungary was part of the Eastern Bloc. So when I went there, actually I went there is interesting how I got there. I was managing a small children's chorus in Boston while I was a student at NEC, and we had a European trip. We exchanged with a children's choir in Czechoslovakia, and we went to visit them, and they came to visit us. So I got to see um,
Mm.
Czechoslovakia. I was in Czechoslovakia on the first New Year's Eve at the fall of communism. People were crying in the streets. You know, it was incredible. It was
Wow.
an incredible experience. So that I had done the year before. Then I graduated from NEC, and then I went to Hungary, which is right next to Czechoslovakia. And so it was just a year after that. I got off. I arrived in Budapest through the plane, and I made my way somehow to the train station to go to the school where I was going to be studying. That school was in a small town outside of Budapest. So if you land in a European city, even in the Eastern Bloc, it's not too shocking. It's older and dirtier, and now not today, but then it was a little older and dirtier than the West, but was still a big city. Well, I made my way to this gorgeous train station in Budapest and got on a train for Kecskemét. And I didn't know really anything, and nobody around was speaking English. And the only thing I could say
Mm.
to people was the word of the town. Kecskemét was the name of the town. And I had these giant American suitcases with my belongings for the year. And so everybody knows you're American by this. And I arrived in Kecskemét, and I didn't know where I was. I just knew somebody on the train was helping me because he understood the word and told me what town it was to get off the train. I got off the train in this empty platform. It's outdoors and it's completely empty, and it looks like something from the movies of a 1940s black and white movie, you know? And it was
Oh
just
wow.
dusty and empty, and the train is old and rickety, driving off on the tracks, and there's no one around. And I've got my 2 giant
Oh
suitcases,
man.
and I'm like, "Oh my god, what have I done? Where am I?" And so I said I just had to make my way down the platform with my giant suitcases and into this little train station that looked, literally like something from 1927. And there was somebody from the school waiting out front to pick me up. So they had our pictures. And so somebody walked up to me and said, "Hello, Linda. Welcome to Ketchkamet." And we got in the car and made our way to the school. So it was a little shocking there for a few minutes, though.
That must have been a feeling of relief when that person came up to you.
Yes. But I tell you, I love Hungary. It's a wonderful culture,
Hmm.
wonderful people, and I loved the country, and I love the city of Budapest very much.
Wow. So what was kind of some of the first things that they started teaching you that was different than what you were normally what you were used to?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question too, because the Kodai Institute in, Kecskemét is built on the system of music training by a Hungarian composer named Kodai. That's his name. So Kodai and another composer named Bela Bartok were really interesting composers. They were around the also 19th century, and they were trained musicians, wonderful musicians who went to conservatory, but they realized that the Hungarian culture had a huge wealth of high quality music that nobody knew about because it was, again, people's music. Just like for us, the blues and hip hop, for
Mm,
them, people were sitting in the fields working and creating this incredible music that nobody was hearing. So these two guys went out in the fields with carrying those giant tape recorders, right? It's I guess, late 1800s, early 1900s, early 1900s, carrying these big tape recorders and microphones and sticking them in the faces of farmers and people
wow.
living in the countryside. And they recorded the songs. And then they went back to the city and they wrote compositions on those harmonies and melodies and development of the music. And they were just enormous impact. They wrote all kinds of
Mm.
music. And if you listen to that music, you immediately know it's different from what came before.
Right? Like the question we talked about before, you're like, oh, this is something that we don't know about. Okay.
That's
So
exactly what it
how
was.
you spent a year there, and I guess compare your feelings of that arrival on that empty platform, and then now I probably going back to that same empty platform to leave. Like, what had you gained from that experience? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you were trained greatly, but what else had you learned about yourself through that time?
Well, I certainly learned that other people in the world are much more polite than Americans. And that Americans have a way of thinking we deserve things in a way or
Mm,
expecting things which we don't even know we're expecting. I guess this is called privilege. So it varies even within the country. But, when what I like to say is nothing like going to a foreign country to learn about yourself,
yep.
right? And it's like traveling and living in a foreign country is like getting a new mirror. So I was anyways college-ish age, so early mid 20s, and I wanted things to be right, and I didn't like unfairness and inequality, and it was very strange compared to everybody else. So I was like, oh, other people don't really care about these things; they just live their lives. So that
Unfortunately.
was fun. But it was a great experience. It was an international school, so there were so many people from other countries. And the
Mm.
food, I learned a lot about the food, and I always say going food shopping in a foreign country is a
Oh
great
man.
experience that everybody should have to do once. Yeah. And this was empty
Who was
shell, going to stores because this is just after the fall of communism, so the store shelves are empty, or there would be, 50 jars of peppers, fermented peppers, and that's was only food in the store. So it was a
wow.
tremendous time, and then I was there during the transformation when the stores
Mm.
became capitalist and the supplies came in and everything changed and people would just cry and it was extremely powerful times to be there. And as a musician, I think that I was exposed to a more rigorous training than I had at New England
Mm.
Conservatory, even, and the ear training and the ability to understand and use music was much more rigorous than anything I'd had before. Even my piano teacher I'd had several piano teachers in the States, and this woman was incredible. She just whipped me right into shape for after, a year, took a year, but and then I actually didn't come home. I went to Vienna and I stayed in Europe for another, 15 years or 14 years, something like that.
You have a very unique perspective on that time period. That influenced the world. So you're an American over here witnessing how Eastern Europe is changing after the fall of communism. That's like, I don't know, that's the book. That's a book that needs to be written. Uh, so you leave the school, and from there you do what? Is this when you start touring? Is this when you start going, all right, I need to find a band to sing with? Like how does that transition happen?
Well, I was a classical singer, so I didn't want a band. I had to audition. So
Right.
I went to Vienna. It's very close to Hungary.
Hmm.
Like going, excuse me, it's like going from Boston to New York approximately. And I found a voice teacher there who was actually an American, and studied also with some European voice teachers there. And I started learning what I needed to learn to get a job, and that was also not that fast. It takes a while. So I started auditioning, I started attending classes, I started learning the ropes and knocking on doors, and slowly made my way into chamber music and small ensembles, and there's a lot of church
Mm,
music. So the church music in Europe is European, obviously, and it's Mozart and Schubert. And a lot of the churches every morning they have a Bach cantata, which we have a few churches here who do that, but it's very common there. Or they have a Mozart mass every single Sunday, so with orchestra in the church. So it's a good job, and I did a lot of that kind of work, and then I did solo recitals, and then I
mm.
auditioned a lot. I went to other countries and took courses and worked with different conductors, and um, basically, I call myself a classical road warrior. So I was always on the train or buses and traveling around and doing anything I could that I liked to do.
Man, when you started talking about auditioning, it kind of felt like, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it was more akin to theater because it wasn't like this, this band, it's just you and your band and you're on the road all the time. It was more like trying to find a play, to be in and be a part of. Does that make sense? Is that am I on base with that?
Yes, that's what it is. It's classical singing, opera singing. It's theater. The opera takes place in a theater, and it's uh, also concerts. There are concerts, so there's a
Hmm.
lot of music for singer and orchestra. There's a lot of music for a choral group in orchestra. So a choral group can be anywhere from 150 choral group, or it can be seven
Wow.
singers in orchestra or seven singers in harp. I did a tour one season with a group that was seven singers and a harpist. And we went to churches and community places and did small concert tours on small stages. It was very beautiful. So there's lots of different opportunities. There's a lot of chamber
Hmm.
music. That would be with the harp. The one thing was very unique, but chamber music would be a very small orchestra, like not a chamber orchestra, which would be like 4 to 6 instruments and singers who do whatever. And I also did a lot of solo recitals because I did a lot of American art song. American art song is music that was written in the early 20th century by composers like Aaron Copland, who were some of the big American composers of art music. And these songs were very popular, and there weren't too many people doing them in Europe. Obviously, I don't think there was anybody except a few celebrities and me. And I would then tour those recitals at concert halls,
What
and
would you say
it's very popular.
your big break was? Was it when you started doing those American songs, or was it something else that really kind of you felt like, man, I'm kind of on the map here? Did you ever have that experience as you were touring?
Well, I don't know if there is such a thing as a big break unless you're going to sing at the
Mm,
Metropolitan Opera, which I did not do. So I did not sing at any what we call A-level houses. In the world of opera classical music, there's the opera houses where people get cast and sing in performances like the Metropolitan Opera. They come in three levels. They're categorized by A level, which is Metropolitan Opera, Covent Garden, these kind of places. And then there's B level and C level. And so I was in like the C and B. So I which is, I'm very lucky. I have no complaints. I
Mm,
performed a lot and I sang a lot of places I could never have imagined singing. And I grew a lot as a person and as a singer and an artist. Um, but I don't think there's any one big break unless you're going to break through to
mm,
that A level and you get your first contract with the Met. Maybe you call that a big break. But I think even people who end up singing there would also say it's a long, slow slog. And that one big break was actually like a slog through a lot of things. And finally, like you get
mm.
through that crack there, um, more than it just being one big break. I think the one big break stuff is maybe gone. Maybe that was like years ago, and today it's just a different world, I think.
Yeah. So this is actually going to bring us to our next number, which is 310 Grammys. So among the alumni of Berklee School of Music, where you teach now, that's how many Grammys they've produced, which again, Wikipedia research. But how did you transition from touring and the singing that you were doing to now going, okay, I think I want to now teach music?
Well, that's another really interesting story. Um, when I was in Europe, I met somebody who worked with a teacher from Hollywood. And I met him at a conference, and I had already started doing a little bit of voice teaching then. I had been invited by a colleague that I did some concerts with to come to a conservatory where he was music director. And I was teaching part time at this small conservatory in Vienna when I was at this conference and met somebody who worked with this Hollywood teacher. And he said, I should get lessons with him. And I thought, that's crazy because why would I want to study with someone who's like teaching 13-year-old pop singers to sing or something? Well, he said, "Oh no, it's not like that. That's just what you hear in the media. That's not what it is." And so I looked into it and it's true. So the teacher who he had referred me to in Hollywood was famous for teaching some of the great pop stars, but he was actually also a classically trained singer and had made his start in the classical world and had classical training and degrees. And so I made my way to him. I started with some of his proteges to see if I liked it or what was going to happen, and made my way to him. And I decided to move back to the States actually because
Mm.
my parents were getting older. And it was that little pull of the history that we talked about at the beginning today.
Full circle.
I was feeling like my parents are getting older and I could do really creative, fun things in the States, especially now that I'm getting to know this guy in Hollywood and learn some new things and not be so far away from my parents as they age. I don't want to wait until they're, in a nursing home and can't speak for me to return to the
Mm.
US. And of course, that was a long time ago, and my mother is now going to be 101 in July. So I didn't miss anything, but I'm still glad I came back so I could take care of her. She's very good. She doesn't need much help. But to make a long story shorter, I decided to learn contemporary music, and I actually did study that. And I studied with him in his studio, and I learned how he teaches people in contemporary music, and I learned about contemporary music and it came full circle because he was a teacher of Stevie Wonder, who I had been in love with when I was 10.
Wow.
So it was brought me full circle, and I learned how to teach contemporary singers from him. And when I was teaching in Boston on my private studio, someone from Berkeley contacted me and asked me to teach a workshop there, which I
Mm.
did and had a lot of fun. And then they asked me to come teach there, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, but they convinced me I should give it a try. So I'm still there. This is going to be 9.5 years that I've been teaching at Berkeley.
Why weren't you sure at first? Because, Berkeley, that's a big deal.
Well, I'm always a little bit cautious of things with big names because things are not
Mm,
always what they appear to be, right? That's one of the things I learned about the music industry. Things are not always what they appear to be, and you have to look closely. And, to be honest, I had heard that, Berkeley's voice department was not the most successful department. And if you look at
mm,
those 310 Grammy winners, if that's the correct number, they're all in bands and production and engineering and a lot
mm.
of other things, but they're not really vocalists. Now there's been a few, but at that time there had not been. So I was a little wary of moving into a college environment that was going to have sort of um, uh, an approach that I was supposed to conform to. So I didn't want to conform.
Mm.
I felt like I had been learning from the best and that I had this tremendous experience overseas, and I didn't want to conform to somebody else's idea, especially when it didn't appear to be that successful in the
Successful.
world in the music industry. I mean, the vocalists,
Right,
So,
right.
but at the same time, I told the voice department that's why I didn't want to go teach there, and they said, "Yes, we know, and we are changing it now, and we're building up the
Mm.
department to be different, and that's why we want you to come here." And so that's how they convinced me to come there. Um, and so it's just important to recognize that the music industry is a lot of marketing. It's a lot of business, just like everything else. It's a business, and you have to be able to kind of see through the marketing to see if this is what you really want to do. Because if you do music industry only for the business, your music won't be very good. You have to be doing it
Mm.
for the music. And then it's a business too. You can make it also a business, but you have to make sure that your focus is clear or you won't be happy.
So by the time you got to Berkeley, you had already had this experience of been taught by the best teachers. I have my own career that I can also point back to. I kind of don't need the crap, you know. I feel like I've
Mhm.
kind of built up a. I know how to do this, you know. So you were really like, you know what? I'll pass. And then they like, actually, we kind of need you. That's is that kind of how the conversation went?
Well, it did go something like that, but
A little bit,
Yes, I shouldn't say that out loud, but
of
that's
course
kind of
not.
how it went. But I think they also then got kind of mad at me for having that attitude, but, it's worked out pretty well, and I have to say that
Hmm.
the head of the department, has put up with me pretty well and pretty generously over the years, and, it's been a great opportunity because, frankly, when I wrote my book, I had offers from 3 publishers, and that probably would not have happened if I wasn't a Berkeley professor. So, your
Mm.
first book is a little difficult to get traditional publishers to notice you, and, I think having the Berkeley professorship, helped me get those traditional publishing offers.
Yeah, so let's talk about the book because you have this experience. You have the part where you start teaching. And so how does that go into I think I need to write a book? And then there's like the whole neuroscience angle, which you're getting your master's in currently. Like, how did these couple of things come together? Because when you think of neuroscience, you don't necessarily think of music. So how did these things merge?
Well, it's very interesting you should say that because a lot of music has a lot of people in music and people who study music have been fascinated with how is this working in my brain or how does this
Mm,
work in our brain and why does music affect us? Why do we feel something when people play music? And why do I feel something when I sing? Or why do you feel something when I sing?
yep.
These questions have fascinated people for a long time. And that is basically neuroscience, the science of the mind, right? How does it work? So I think what happened first is well, there's 2 things. One is I've always loved to write, and I wanted to write a book when I was 8 years old, and I, actually sat with my typewriter on Saturday mornings and tried to do it, but didn't really succeed very well, but, um, the typewriter, right? So so anyways, I had a student here in Boston in my private studio who was not a professional singer, but a student at Harvard University. because I'm right in
Mm.
between Harvard University and MIT. And he was graduating from Harvard with an undergraduate degree in literature. And he's the one who said to me, Linda, you must write a book. And I said, I can't write a book. I haven't written a book before. And my teacher wrote a book and, didn't really help a lot of people, even though it's a pretty good book, but it didn't really help a lot of people. And he was kind of disappointed with it. So I don't know if I should write a book.
Mm.
And he said, Linda, you've got to write a book. There's so much that you can say and do that's of value. And so he and I started meeting and having these sort of discussions about what the book could be and what I would be
Mm.
saying. And then I got the job offer from Berkeley. So I started working at Berkeley and I kind of put the book idea on the shelf for a couple of years. And then I revisited it. And I went on a writer's retreat. They were offering a special to invite people to use their retreat. It was a new location in Vermont, in the mountains of the Green Mountains in Vermont. So another really incredible New England environment, New England space. And I sat there in the mountains of Vermont and wrote 1,000 words and gave it to the leader of the writers retreat. He said, "You can write a book. This is great." So
Mm.
that's how I got on the path. And I wrote a book that I thought every young singer would need. So it's sort of for beginner, intermediate, maybe some advanced singers who have some holes in some of their experiences. And I had a vision for helping people to clear their minds and their mental states about singing, but also get really good training. And you can't get training from a book, but at least you can get the path. And if you have a path, then you can find a teacher to help you or a situation that can help you follow that path.
Mm.
So the book has stories and interviews with singers, and it has some explanation of the why and the how of singing. So things I would teach in about a 3 month lesson stint with a new student and say, look, this is causing you stress because singing is part of our DNA and it's part of our survival instincts, and
Mm.
this is why vocalization and using your voice is so important to you, and it's affecting your ability to move forward because it's very big part of your identity. And so I found this research on philosophy and history and then the cognition. How does our brain work? Singing is a motor skill, and how do motor skills work? And how does motor skill learning work? Which is a
Mm.
very interesting thing. Interesting enough, we have similar cognition around our voices as birds. So
Wow.
birds similar cognitive setup that we do, but they're the only other species that can make complex vocalizations. So it was very
As you're
interesting, and that's
talking,
how I got interested in science.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, sorry, yeah, that's what led me down the road towards neuroscience. So once I had written and the book was published, I thought, I would like to find out more about this.
Mm.
Now that I've written the book on it, I want to know even more. And
It's
that's
like
how I got
every time you
interested.
say
So,
something,
yeah.
I want to know more.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the COVID the pandemic lockdown took place, and I thought, "Why don't I do this degree while we're in
Mm.
lockdown?" And I'm not finished yet. So I'll finish at the end of this year.
How did you balance the experiences in the science, in the teaching, in the story? So I would imagine there's like kind of some gymnastics with that in order to not push the book in one way or the other. Like, did you have some help with that, or was it just you reading it and maybe a feeling?
I took out a big piece of paper and I drew on the Duret what my vision was. And that's what it is. And I happen to have it here, and I can just show you a couple of pages. You'll see what I mean,
Sure.
even though the view won't be perfect um, because of the computer. But I'll try and find you a page where you can see what I'm talking about. So, what's different about my book that had never happened before in the history of singing or singing teaching is that it's self assessments. So,
Mm.
so we have here, so for example, in the book, you have some music examples, some scales, and then you have some self-assessment. And then you have some stories that help you understand what you were experiencing while you were doing that previous exercise and that previous experience. And then you have
Ah.
some scripts from like a typical lesson, a conversation that you might have with another student. And I did some scripts from sample experiences with students. And I've had singers come up to me and say, that script is like exactly me, and it's because once you've been teaching for a while, you do hear a lot of the same things.
Mm.
So I just had a vision for like story, explanation, training, self assessment, and then interview for fun, you know?
Wow. So you had
Yeah.
like a formula. You're like, each piece, I got a kind of a formulaic way of how I want to teach it.
Yes. And I had the pages laid out on the floor in my living room and I put them together like a puzzle. It was fun.
That is so awesome. As a high school teacher, I have to teach all the same stuff every year. And like you said, there's like the same questions that always come up. So
Yes.
like you're always like piecing it together. Like, okay, I know I need to teach this piece first. This is how I want to do it. I know I need to teach this piece second. All so that when we get to the end, like they feel confident in what they just learned. So many more questions, but we have to get to our three whats. Okay, so the three whats you can answer however long or however short you would like. And I ask these to every person that I interview as we come to a close, right? I say close because, like, who knows what's going to happen after this, right? So here we go. Number one, what's an opinion that you have that will be considered unpopular?
Yeah, it's difficult because it's sometimes difficult to know what's unpopular and what's popular, but
Mm,
my basic opinion about life for humans to be happy and feel good is that we require a certain level of mastery in something. So, in order for humans to be feeling like they're thriving, we have to be good at something. And it doesn't mean that you wake up and you're born this way and there's some incredible talent and gift from the heavens where you're just good at something. No, no, no. It means we have to master something. We have to develop a skill and something we care about and getting better at it. And this
mm,
feeling of mastering something and getting better at it is something that is innate to us as humans. We need to do that. And today's world, it's not really about mastery, right? It's about the next best thing and it's
no.
about instant gratification and people don't want to do things for the long haul. They want to do things for now and next week and next year. And it's really, I think, a huge impact on our mental health. I think that
Mm,
this need for mastery is one we're missing from our lives, and that's a big player in the problems we have with mental health today.
wow. So many questions, but I'll move to the second what. If you weren't teaching music, what would you be doing?
Hmm. I love the way things work. I think we talked about this a little earlier that I love to know how things work. So I
Mm,
am very fascinated with how anything works. So I can actually see myself in a completely different setting, tinkering with something and making things. But it would also have to be creative in making things. But there's also times where I think I should have just been a scuba diver.
okay. What number three? What advice would you give to someone in high school? Because I do play these interviews for my kids sometimes when I'm like, hey, yo, y'all got to listen to Linda Balliro. She's amazing. She has some advice for y'all. What would you say to those kids?
Follow your passions and always believe that anything that you envision is possible. the extent to our own limiting beliefs is almost unbelievable. So sometimes you have limiting beliefs you don't even know you have. They're unconscious.
Mm,
So you can have limiting beliefs that you know, that you've learned from your environment growing up, and you can have limiting beliefs that you don't even know you have because they're just in the back of your mind. And so you have to really believe that you can make things happen in your life the way you want if you follow your passion and you develop the skills that you need to get there. So,
mm.
this doesn't mean follow your passion and everything will be great. It means follow your passion and stay in that intentional focus to get where you want to be, and you can get there. There is actually no limit to what you can accomplish in your life, meaning in your work, in your personal life, in your environment, anything that you want, you can find. If you can envision it and you can focus, you will get there. And never let yourself be stopped by any limiting belief at all.
Okay. I mean, what better place to close it? Never be stopped by your limiting belief or anyone else's. Obviously, we can't leave here without Linda telling you all where you can get the book.
Oh, you can get my book, Being a Singer, The Art, Craft, and Science, anywhere books are sold. Your local bookstore might not have a copy. They might have to order it, but you can get it anywhere online, including Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and etc. And you can check it out also on my website at lindaballiro.com, where you can read more about it. And you can also read a little bit about a book that was recently published where I'm a contributing author. So I didn't write
Mm.
the book, but I wrote chapter 44. And that book is called The Creative Life Book. And if you ever feel like you're not sure you're creative, or you don't know how to be creative, or you wish you were more creative than you are now, the Creative Life Book has 65 essays that will give you inspiration and motivation and strategies to make creativity part of your daily life. And you can find that on Amazon right now for 99 cents.
99 cents, that's it?
That's it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. That'll be $1 well spent. Well,
it certainly is.
thank you, Linda, for coming on and having this amazing, I would say, pretty long conversation and just sharing your experiences. It's been a treat. So make sure y'all go check out the book. And of course, follow me on IG and TikTok. Merch link in the hoodie at the Living Numbers Podcast. Just Google it. You'll find me everywhere. And we will see you all in the next ramble.
Bye.
Oh, that was amazing.